And so hopefully that trend will continue and people's, that median will be pushed up above the 15,000. Now I thought this was an interesting analysis to have a look at. It's a European-wide piece of analysis by the OECD, and it looks at the replacement ratio at retirement. And what that is when you, the replacement ratio is defined as the gross pension entitlement of an individual, and that means mandatory pension. So in the UK that will be the state pensions. So the gross pension retirement divided by the gross pre-retirement earnings, and that's of an average earner. So an average earner in this country earns about £27,000 a year. Now, if we assume that they're earning that just before they retire, then what percentage will be the replacement ratio? In the UK, it's going to be about 30% of that amount. If you're lucky enough to live in Holland, obviously you're kind of quids in with the mandatory pension system, because you're going to have almost as much in your retirement as your mandatory pension payout as you would have been doing with your earnings. So I think that's really an important point, because it shows that the UK is in, such a sort of a low position in terms of what you're entitled to, what you're going to get in retirement. And the thing that we've compared that to is then researching people and saying, what is your expectation of that replacement ratio? So what percentage of your income do you think you need in retirement? Cover your needs, cover your thing. And on average, people say 62%. So way above the UK. So that's kind of a big opportunity in terms of private pensions and additional savings that can be seen. Now, and nearly 50% of people said that they would want 70% of their salary. So there's kind of a big discrepancy about what they are likely to get and what they actually want. So what are the sources from which people expect to get their retirement income? So this is still about expectations. So just over 30% of those questions, and this is from a Watson-Wyatt employee survey of about 2,000 people, thought that the state pension was extremely or very important as an expected source of income. However, the pension source given the most weight was that given by an employer or a private pension, and followed by non-pension savings and property. Again, property coming in there. So there seems to be an acknowledgement that the state pension is not going to satisfy all the needs in retirement, and people have got other sources in mind. So that's expectations. What's the reality of what people get when they retire? Well, on average, for a recently retired person, we get about 60% of the income from sources other than the state. And you can see the bottom two bars are state, so either state pensions or benefits. When you're just retired, we've already talked about people wanting to work, so you can see the yellow blocks are earnings from, so presumably people doing full-time, part-time jobs. And also you can see investments are quite solid, so haven't spent all the money, maybe interest is coming through. And once you get to 75 and over though, those alternative sources drop, and there's much more reliance on state pensions and an employer pension that's coming out. So I've mentioned a few times the sort of the mention of property as part of people's thoughts about retirement. And so it's quite interesting to show here. On the left-hand side, we've got property value and mortgage value by age group. This was 2007, so take the bars down quite a lot for the property value. but still you've got sort of property values up there and mortgage values. Over 65s, there's a very small line you probably can't see for mortgage value, but in the main, people, I'm assuming, will either have paid off their mortgage or they will have downsized in order to get rid of the mortgage. On the right, we've got pure property equity. So you've got the over 65 sitting there with a big chunk of equity, and it's probably gone smaller because of trading down, etc., but they're still sat there with less equity. Now, I would think that that's sort of screaming out as an opportunity for equity release, given the fact that state pension is below expectations, that there's a need to top up, given the fact that there are generally very low value pension pots that people have to actually translate into an income. Right, I'd like to finish by looking at some of the financial challenges that we face looking at the and the in retirement markets. And I've tried to pull out just a couple of the key themes. So the first one is longevity, and just looking at the length of time that people are going to have to spend in retirement. You know, if you've got a pension pot, it's got to last to cover that whole length of time. That's a big issue for financial services for us to address. Financial literacy. Now, I've not mentioned it through here, but there have been lots of papers and research on financial literacy, particularly this year seems to be a real preponderance of them. If you look at, for example, the IEFA paper, white paper on decumulation, that talks a lot about financial literacy. There's lots of those things. And it demonstrates that, in general, the population is not financially literate, and specifically around and approaching retirement, they're not particularly financially literate. And of course, that's the point where, you know, you really need people to be able to make effective financial decisions, obviously with advice, but they still need to be able to make choices for themselves. So it's a big issue for us to try and address. Employment is the third trend. Now, I've said about how many people want to work after they have retired, and I think lots of people are going to need to work after they've retired. So again, as a country, we need to have employers who are kind of obliged to, you know, willing to, able to employ people who are over the state pension age in order to satisfy that growing requirement. And finally, long-term care, which we've said, again, when you live in retirement a long time, the longer you live there, the more likely you are to need some sort of long-term care. That's a big issue. I said before about trying not to look at people who are retired as one group and trying to break it down and seeing the kind of the different needs and requirements and segments within that group. And this graph plots the typical household spending for a pensioner household, and obviously we've got it with a couple and with a single occupant household. So on average, between the ages of kind of 65 and 75, 40% of total spending is on goods associated with recreation, such as hotels, transport, restaurants. So that's the kind of the vision I think that we all have of retirement, this sort of very active retirement, doing the things we've always wanted to do, having a good time, bit of a party time, 65 to 75. So that's where most of the expenditure is going. Subsequently, bit of a lull, once people reach the age of 75, they often become less mobile, and so the expenditure pattern reduces as you sort of need, so it's a bit depressing, as they, less mobile, less partying. And then, obviously, sort of in older ages, this is really depressing. No, then health issues kicking. There's a chance of